Live with you tonight on In Focus. Rand Water is asking Gauteng residents to use water sparingly as it prepares for infrastructure maintenance that's expected to cause water disruptions for up to 54 hours starting tomorrow morning. The interruption is expected to result in low pressure or possibly no water in affected areas. Rand Water COO Mahlomula Mehlo says the interruptions could lead to supply reduction.
We're talking about a shutdown in the technical term. It's a widely used term that describes that a portion of a system will be isolated for purposes of maintenance. This by no means is an expression of our intention to cut the water supply. So the water will be flowing in our system. In fact, to put it in context, the reduction that you referred to, Toli, is only 14% of our water supply, our daily supply as Rand Water. From 4,400 million liters per day that we supply, we will only be reducing by 600 million liters per day, and only one system will be affected, and that is the Ferrial Adam system, where the raw water supply is actually being connected.
Now, South Africa is a water-scarce country, being the 30th driest in the world. Now, studies show that by the beginning of the next decade, the country will face its biggest water crisis if we don't act. For more on this, I'm joined now by OUTA's Water and Environment Consultant, Dr. Ferrial Adam, and Council for Scientific and Industrial Research Water Center Manager, Dr. Rembu Magoda. Good evening to you all, and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on In Focus. Dr. Adam, let me start with you. I mean, is this the beginning of the crisis with the kind of announcements that we are getting now from the Water Department in Johannesburg, or this is just routine maintenance and shouldn't necessarily be getting us on an alarm?
So there's two things. I mean, I think that there is a need for maintenance. So this is a necessary move by Rand Water, but at the same time, we are in a water crisis, and so it's two separate issues, but we're not behaving as if we're in a water crisis. I think if you looked at the reports that looks at, you've got cities like Nelson Mandela Bay that could have a day zero in December. You're looking at Beaufort West. You're looking at predictions with climate change, and the direction we're heading is that in Gauteng we could have a day zero in the next 10 to 15 years. So there is a crisis, but I think there's also the infrastructure's failing, and that's another crisis. So there's like two different crises, I think.
Yeah, a crisis of infrastructure and a crisis of water resources themselves. Dr. Magoda, are we behaving like there's no crisis?
Definitely, Thabo. I don't think the residents are behaving in a manner that really helps the situation. More often, you see people who are not even aware that we are in a water crisis situation. So I concur with my colleagues here that South Africans are not really behaving in a way that will help the situation. The water resources are dwindling, and we cannot produce additional water resources. We really have to take care of what is existing. And with the way that we are currently behaving, we are heading for a crisis.
Yeah.
Current situation.
Yeah, tell me the current situation. What are the details of what are the factors mainly affecting our water situation in the country?
It is an open secret, Thabo, that our water treatment plants and the distribution networks are in a dire situation. They really need to maintain them. So such maintenance is very encouraging. It is something that should be encouraged actually throughout the country. We don't have to wait to a point where the infrastructure is becoming dysfunctional completely. So we know very well there are certain municipalities that are already dysfunctional. The China municipalities that we are dealing with currently, it's not yet at a dysfunctional state. So for them to be embarking in a journey of maintaining their infrastructure, I think it's something that we really need to applaud the municipalities for, because poor maintenance of infrastructure is one of the worrying trends in our municipalities.
Yeah. In many provinces and areas around South Africa, in one way or the other, Dr. Adam, water infrastructure has been hit. And if you look at the Makhanda situation, is one that certainly stays prominent. Hammanskraal is one that stays prominent to the fact that Dr. Magoda is raising of our water treatment plants and their effectiveness. Do we have early warning systems for possible problems with the infrastructure that are in place?
So, we do have warning systems in the sense that there are ways that the municipalities and the institutions looking at water that can monitor water leakage. That's why we know that we lose at least 40% of our water through leakages, right? So there are those things. The problem is that the maintenance is poor, as Dr. Magoda has said, but also there's not enough, and we've lost a lot because of corruption. So where infrastructure was supposed to be fixed, that money is gone. We've got raw sewage flowing into our pipes, etc. So the problem is then that we don't have enough monitoring and keeping people accountable for the failures that are occurring around the country, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the immediate, of course, water leakage and water that we will require in the immediate, but do we have an ability to forecast, for example, what will be required in the next decade, and are we acting in a manner that seeks to address that need that we will be seeing 10 years from now?
That's such a good point. That's exactly my fear, is that we're behaving as if we're going to have an insurmountable amount of safe drinking water for the next future, and we don't. We're facing a whole range of issues, from pollution to water scarcity. Climate change is drying up our rivers. We're having harsher droughts, and we're doing the same thing we did with electricity when it was too late to actually then deal with the issues. And so now we have to deal with load shedding for the next 10 to 15 years. We can prevent that. And I think that is what we're saying is we have to prevent that. We have to work with a whole range of sectors. We have to be more mindful that agriculture uses the bulk of our water. How do we use it more sparingly? How do we change the way and become more mindful of saving water? South Africans per capita uses more water than some countries with much less water than we do. So we have to be more mindful of how we're using our water.
Yeah, and Dr. Magoda, what's the role of science here in being able to use water sparingly? What role can science play? What solutions can science bring for us to deal with this matter of scarcity?
Science play a critical role in ensuring that there is water use efficiency throughout the municipalities and the country at large. So without us championing water use efficiency in the municipal level, we are not going to see the reality of water use reduction in the municipalities. So there is a serious lack of knowledge on how to implement water use efficiency at different spheres of government. And that's where scientists need to come in. In most of the municipalities, there is a serious lack of technical competency that can drive that critical component of water use efficiency. Some don't even know how water utilization is happening within their own area. And that is very worrying if we are to conserve the little water that we have currently. So there is a serious need for us, both private and public, to come together the same way we are doing with COVID-19. Ferrial Adam already indicated the importance or the challenge that we are having in terms of corruption and so on and so on. Those are things that as scientists, we don't have control over that environment. So the political will is very much necessary or very critical to ensure that there is a wise use of investment in the form of finances that are being pumped into water infrastructure.
Yeah.
So without us managing the resources that are being channeled towards water infrastructure, we are not going to win the battle of water use efficiency in the municipalities. because the municipalities that are really struggling in terms of managing the little funds that they are given the responsibility to manage the water at local government. Of course, provincial and national level, they do come in there and there, but we are not really seeing the effectiveness of national government coming into the municipalities and ensure that the municipalities are delivering as expected. And that talks to the poor implementations of all the good strategies and the acts that South Africa has.
We'll talk to that issue of poor implementation and an area that you're particularly passionate about of skills development in the water sector and whether or not we have enough skills and what are the skills that we require for the kind of challenges that we will be facing in the future. We continue on In Focus in a moment. Dr. Rembu Magoda as well as Dr. Ferrial Adam, they are with us tonight, and we're of course discussing broadly the water crisis in South Africa. Stay with us. Live tonight on In Focus, Dr. Ferrial Adam and Dr. Rembu Magoda with us tonight, and of course talking the issue of the water crisis. This as residents in Johannesburg are faced now, starting tomorrow, with 54 hours of reduction in water supply, and in some instances there actually will be no water at all, as per the report coming from the Water Board. Well, we're asking the question, what is it that needs to be done to deal with this issue of water crisis, and some issues being raised around the various water resource management practices that have got to be in place. But before the break, Dr. Magoda, I wanted to ask a question in the area of skills development. You yourself having had, 17 years or so in the water research sector, do we have sufficient skills when it comes to the water sector?
Definitely, Thabo. We do have the skills in South Africa, but we are really failing to utilize the skills that we have as a country. It will be very unfair to say South Africa is really struggling in terms of producing technical skills. We do have enough to see South Africa through this water crisis. But the challenge is how are we making sure that the skills that we have are best utilized for the benefit of South Africa? We are losing the skills simply because we're not making use of them. They are seeing some greener pastures outside the country, whereas we can best utilize such skills in the country. That talks to most of our municipalities, that you still find them lacking even a single engineer. You don't expect a municipality without a single engineer to run an effective water distribution network. It just can't happen. We can't find ourselves outsourcing the whole water distribution network system. Yeah. As a municipality, we should have control over that. We cannot allow the external resources to come in, manage our water supply system, create the tender specifications for the municipalities, and even deliver on such. Yeah. So that is something that is very wrong about our system. Yeah. And if it is not corrected, I don't see South Africa getting out of this situation. Very few municipalities will go through this challenge. Those that are able to appoint technically competent personnel, there is still a challenge in other municipalities to appoint technical competent people, not because they're not there, but there are various reasons that they can be given by different municipalities. Yeah. Because the fundings are there, the positions are there, but occupied by people who are not technically competent to run the water services. And that is something that needs to be taken care of. But again, we as CSIR, we can only collaborate with municipalities and work with them, but it's something that we cannot force ourselves into that collaboration. Right, right. It is a very complicated relationship to find yourself in at a CSIR and a DWS, which at national level and provincial levels. There are various regulations that need to be complied with to ensure that organizations like a CSIR and the Water Research Commissions and the NRF, those research organizations, if they are to play a meaningful role in addressing water challenges, we really need to unlock the challenges that are also put by the barriers associated with the supply chain mechanism. So those things are really playing a critical role in ensuring or in sustaining the current system that is not helping the water crisis in South Africa.
Now, without the politics, I know, as you mentioned, the challenges at municipal level, right? Just purely from a research point of view and the challenges that are faced by the people in Hammanskraal, how easy, in your view, is it to solve that particular challenge? Is it something that can be turned around within 6 months?
It will be very unfair to say the challenge in Hammanskraal will be resolved in 6 months. If you are to consider all the areas that needs to be addressed to deal with the cases of Hammanskraal, it will always be difficult for someone to create a problem and expect the same person to deal with that problem. It will be very necessary to get an independent institutions or independent contractor to deal with Hammanskraal problem. And we need a dedicated investment to deal with Hammanskraal challenge. If there is a will from national level or at provincial level to deal with that, not just a will alone, but a will that is supported by the action, I'm very confident that Hammanskraal case can be resolved. Even if it's not resolved in 6 months, but in 6 months we can have a very good progress that we can show the residents of Hammanskraal.
Dr. Ferrial Adams, weigh in on the skills question. Do we have sufficient skills, or are we utilizing the sufficient skill we have adequately?
I think I have to agree with Dr. Magoda. We have the skill, and it's about using the skills adequately. But I want to add to that as well, because you talked about science, and often when we talk about water and fixing water issues, we tend to leave it for the scientists. But there are hundreds and groups around the country who are using citizen science. So it's the kind of testing that you can do for water as ordinary people. You don't have to have. There's obviously the engineering and the technical skills that you need for at municipality level. But we're saying that we could also have testing done by ordinary people so that you can monitor the water resources around the country and create a network or even a platform where this information can be fed into. And we can then monitor governments, when they say they've got clean water or when they've done tests, etc. We can then compare the data. But for that, we think we can do citizen science, and we can have people on the ground doing the testings. It's already been done across the country, where amazing groups are actually testing water, monitoring the water, keeping track of our water resources. And all of that is science related. They don't have science backgrounds. And it's really a powerful voice that's not being heard enough in South Africa. And it's what OUTA wants to actually bring to the fore.
Yeah, and what are the options there as far as that is concerned, and how that should be implemented?
So it's very simple. When you're saying how it should be implemented, communities around rivers or around streams need to come together, and they do exist. So I'll give you an example of the kind of things that's happening, where they're coming together and they're starting to monitor a particular catchment area. So they'll do specific test points, and they'll monitor that over a period of time. They'll also monitor, if they're part of the catchment management forums, where if there's going to be building along a river or if there's going to be construction, they will then be able to comment on it. They will be able to see if it's going to harm the water resources at all, and they can actually, the challenge they have on the ground, and these citizen scientists that we call them, is then to have government act when they say there's a problem.
Right.
So if you look at the issue of South Durban, for example, where activists showed that there was chemical pollution from that fire that went and it damaged chemical in the water resources.
That's
and
right.
They could show that was there, So it's about getting then enforcement of people who are violating basic laws around water.
Sustainability, of course, becomes a big question with COP26 currently going on and issues around climate change and how that impacts on the water resources. Dr. Adams, let me start with you and then I'll come to Dr. Magoda in a moment. There are questions also around aquatic weeds management, in other words, the biological control, and how that also affects our water resources and whether we are handling that in a manner that we should be.
So that's another concern. I don't think that we're adequately acting on the impacts of climate change. I think we talk about it. We have these good statements at an international level, but at a national level, we're not doing enough. I mean, if you just think about the fact that you've got so many towns that are nearing day zero, and there are some communities that have had day zero for months already. So we're not acting on it. And with climate change, what we're going to see is more frequent droughts and harsher droughts. And in a water-scarce country, that is something we cannot afford. The other challenge with climate change is that in one part of the country, it's going to get drier. In another part of the country, we're going to have extreme flooding. We're also not able to deal with that, whether it's infrastructure or in how we're going to cope with the increased floods that we're going to have. And you saw this year, we saw a cyclone hit South Africa for the first time. And we're going to have more and more of that. We're going to see an impact on our food. And when you impact food, you're going to have, impact on water supply. So farmers might start cutting off water to each other, which is, something I've written about as well. So those are the challenges we're going to be facing with climate change. And I really don't think we have done enough for our scarce resources like water to manage the impacts.
Dr. Magoda, how does the impact, for example, of invasive alien plants contribute to this question of water scarcity and the crisis we have?
Tawo, there is a well-documented information regarding the impact of invasive alien plants on water resources, especially surface water, where there are a number of rivers that we know very well that they have dried up as a result of invasive alien plants that are impacting the floodplains. More often when you have these invasive alien plants lining along the riparian vegetation, they suck up all the waters, and most of those rivers, they end up being dry, completely dry. And that really affects the availability of water, especially for farmers who rely mostly on the running surface water. Most of the farmers, they dam directly on the rivers. So when you have a stretch of rivers covered or infested with such invasive alien plants, they do a serious damage in terms of drying up such streams, which are very critical, especially in informal or very rural areas. So that cannot be underestimated. The impact of invasive alien plants, it's real and it needs to be addressed seriously.
Dr. Rembu Magoda and Dr. Ferrial Adams, appreciate your time and helping us in this intervention and the conversation around the crisis of water in the country. Certainly will be coming under the spotlight in the next 3 days or so, as the people of Johannesburg will be seeing some reduction in water supply.